Hello, Gavin here, and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to look at everything you need to know about building your first pedal board. So if you followed my channel for any time now, you'll know that I'm a big fan of effects pedals and often have pedal boards made up in the videos with 3 or 4 pedals at least to make up the sound in the song. So I thought today we'd look at how you go about building a pedal board. So we're going to cover everything from the order to put your pedals in, some different options for that, choosing the right power supply for your setup, and putting it all together on the board and making it all work together. So first up, what do you actually need to build a pedal board? Well, it's quite simple. You need some pedals, a power supply, and the board itself. You're also going to need patch cables and Velcro to fit the pedals to the board. Now there's a couple of different options for all of these elements. Of course, with pedals there are hundreds of pedals on the market, and the size of board you need really just depends on how many pedals you're using. For me, I usually use a really big pedal board because I usually have probably about 15 pedals on my pedal board when I play shows of my own music. But for today's video we're going to use a smaller board. It's a Palmer Pedal Bay 40 and it's a really good size of board, probably a really good size to start with because you could probably fit, as you'll see in this video, 7 pedals and the power supply on the pedal board. So it's probably a really good starting point as a pedal board. And of course the way you have the pedals set up on the board is going to influence the size of board you need and the layout that you need to use as well. So what order should your pedals go in? Well, there's no real right or wrong answer to this. It's whatever suits the sound you're looking for and whatever gives you the sound you're looking for. For me, I tend to put fuzz pedals first. This is something you'll find a lot of guitar players do, and the reason for that is with fuzz pedals you want the interaction between the volume controls on the instrument itself and the pedal. Quite a lot of fuzz pedals can be quite interactive with the volume on your guitar itself and the pedal, and it can give a variety of sounds. So you tend to want that first and before a buffer. So what exactly is a buffer? Well, if you have a Boss pedal like this, you have a buffered pedal. And what that means is when you turn this pedal off, rather than bypassing everything inside the pedal, there's a small amount of circuitry still in the signal chain. And what that means is your pedal is always interacting with your sound. And people often argue, should I have pedals like this on my board that are buffered, or should I have the other type of pedal which is true bypass? Now a pedal like this, when you turn the pedal off, it completely disengages the circuit from the signal chain. So you don't get any sound from this pedal through your circuit. So you don't get any influence on your tone from this pedal when it's disengaged. But really there's not one better than the other, and I actually think you need a combination of both. Because if you only have true bypass pedals, your signal is running through a lot of cabling. And without getting into the details, there's some really detailed videos from That Pedal Show and many other people detailing what's actually happening with your cables when you have long cable runs. But ultimately you lose the brightness of your sound, you lose that top end. And what you'll find is when you put a pedal on, all that top end comes back. But when you turn your pedals off, your tone is really dull. So really having something like this in your signal chain that's buffered makes a huge difference, because the buffer just prevents that signal loss. It just prevents that top end roll off. So I highly recommend having buffered pedals like the Boss ones, or something like this, which is a dedicated buffer. Now, obviously this does take up space on your pedal board, and it only does the job of being a buffer. So really I think the Boss pedals are a great solution. If you don't have the real estate on your pedal board for a dedicated buffer, make sure you've got at least one buffered pedal on there, and you shouldn't find there's any issues with your tone. But back to the signal chain and how you run your pedals. As I said, there's no real hard and fast answer to this. It's really whatever suits you. But for this board, I'll show you what my preferred setup would be. And of course, if you use similar pedals, try one pedal before another and then swap them over and see which sound you prefer. That's really the only real answer to this, is finding the signal chain that works for you. And the only way to do that is to play with pedals and find what works. But for me, I have my tuner first on my signal chain so I can mute everything. So that comes first in my pedal setup. Then I run into my fuzz pedals, so don't have anything between that and my guitar input. Sadly, of course, the tuner is going to interact a little bit, but this is as good as you can get without putting the tuner later in the chain. And some people do that as well, but for me, I like to have my tuner and then run into this. And after my fuzz pedals, I like to go into an overdrive. So this is the Boss OD3, really affordable overdrive pedal. It's a classic, so many players have these on their boards. Actually sounds really cool on bass as well. I'm really big fan of this one. So this is my buffered pedal, so I've got the fuzz before I run into this. And then after my overdrives, I run into my envelope filter. Now some people like to put these before the fuzz pedals, some people like to put them after. For me, I like it after so that I can shape the sound of my fuzz with this. I think of it more like the way a synthesizer works. So this is my filter section after the fuzz. So that comes next for me. After that on this board, we will be running into the June 60. So this is a chorus pedal, and really I like to have modulations after my fuzz and overdrive, but before things like delay and reverb. So for this board, that's going to be the chorus. I really like this chorus pedal. It's emulating the chorus from a Juno 60 synthesizer, and it sounds really cool, so definitely worth checking out. And so that's running after the envelope filter, but before the delay. And next up we have the delay. So today I'm using the Ernie Ball Ambient delay. Main reason for that is because I'm building a smaller pedal board, I wanted something that can be quite flexible. And this has a tap tempo input, so I can use a tap tempo switch like this one to control the tempo and make it match whatever the drummer's doing, and just tie everything together at the right timing. This one also does have some built-in reverb as well, so I can get a little bit of reverb without needing a dedicated pedal for that. So that's next on the signal chain. And then finally, my Eden WTDI preamp pedal, and that's on there just so I can get a good direct sound into my audio interface to record some clips of the board. And I actually have these on most of my pedal boards. I'll put some form of preamp, even if I'm using an amplifier, just as a backup plan in case something goes wrong. A couple of other types of pedals just to watch out for are tremolo and octave pedals. Now I don't have either of these on this board just now today, but something to bear in mind is that a tremolo will work really well put after your overdrives in amongst your modulations, and that's quite a common place for people to use it. But if you want a really traditional tremolo sound, something similar to the Fender guitar amps, you're actually better putting that after your reverb, because that's how it would have been set up in a guitar amp. It's actually affecting the output section of the amplifier. So it's worth bearing that in mind, that tremolo can sound good and sound different in different parts of your pedal board. And of course, octave pedals are the same. A lot of different bass players will like to have their octave pedals before their overdrives and fuzzes, right on the input of their signal chain. But then there's also bass players like myself who like to put the octaves after fuzz and overdrive. I sometimes put it before my envelope filter, sometimes put it afterwards. It really depends on the type of sound I'm going for. Again, it does all just come down to the sound that you're looking for. So it's definitely worth experimenting with that, trying it at the start of your signal chain, after overdrives, before your filters, after filters, just seeing what works best for you, because it's all going to produce a totally different sound, and that's part of the fun of pedals, I think. So that's it for all the pedals that are going to be on the board. Next up, we need to think about how we're going to power it all. When it comes to power supplies, there are a lot of them on the market. A lot of really good ones, and a lot of really affordable ones that might not be quite as good. And the things you need to consider when buying a power supply is, one, the voltage. You'll find that most pedals will run on 9 volts, but you'll have some that will run on 12, some like my Eden preamp that will run on 15, and there's even some that float about in the 18 to 25 volt power rating. So you need something that's going to give you the voltage to power your pedals properly. And you'll find that affordable supplies like these ones here often have 9, 12 and 18 volt options. And that's really cool, so you can still power a lot of these pedals from these. The only thing is, if you use anything like the Eden, it's 15 volt, that's a very specific voltage, and finding one that works with that can be quite difficult at times. So that's one thing you need to bear in mind. And the next thing is current. You need to make sure that your power supply can provide enough current to power your pedals. And you'll find that most pedals will have some form of current rating either on the box, on the pedal itself, or if you go on the manufacturer's website, they'll be able to tell you what kind of power supply you need and how much current the pedal draws. And really, you just need to figure out how much current you need overall and figure out if your supply that you're looking at can provide that. The other thing is isolation. Now this is a little bit more intricate because something like this power supply here, this is the Cioks DC7. This is currently my favourite power supply. This thing is incredible. Provides loads of current. It's got different voltage options, so you can have 9, 12, 15 or 18 volts per output. So each output can be set to a totally different voltage setting, but the big thing is it's totally isolated. So each output is totally isolated from the other ones. And what that means is you're not passing the supply voltage between pedals. You'll often see people using things like daisy chains, where it's one wall wart power supply with a daisy chain of connectors on it. And while they do work, you'll find that those introduce a lot of noise. You'll find that the noise these things get isn't just like the background noise from having a fuzz pedal on, because of course that's just normal for fuzz pedals, that they can be quite noisy. It's more of a digital interference noise with like weird whistles and things like that going on. So you're not something you'd want in your signal chain at all. And something like this is great for fixing that. Now, of course, there are other power supplies, like the ones I've shown you before, like these, that are more affordable and do claim to be isolated. But it's often that groups of outputs are isolated. So a few of the outputs are isolated together, and some are isolated on a different setup, but they're still sharing power to an extent. And you'll find that you can still get a lot of noise with these ones. Now, batteries are of course an option for powering your pedal board. Most standard pedals will have a battery input snap inside the pedal, and that allows you to just plug a 9-volt battery in and power the pedal. And that is of course going to be truly isolated. They're not sharing the battery between the pedals. Each pedal has its own battery, so you shouldn't get any interference with that. Of course, there are the drawbacks of using batteries. They die, they're expensive, and if you use the carbon batteries, they can be prone to leaking as well, so you have to be careful of that. And the other problem as well is modern pedals that are these mini enclosures like this buffer pedal, they don't actually have a battery snap just because the pedal is so small. So an option you have for these types of pedals is something like this. This is the Danelectro Battery Billionaire, and this just gives you 4 batteries like that, with their own individual 9-volt socket on the output, so you can plug that into your pedals and power them off of batteries. The great thing with that is it means you're not actually putting batteries inside the pedals, so in the event that something leaks, it's not the pedal itself that would get damaged, it's just one connector on that. And of course it has an on-off switch on the side, so you don't have the batteries engaged the whole time the pedal is plugged in, because that's the other problem. If you plug a cable into this pedal, it'll engage the battery if you have one inside this. So another really cool use for one of these. And of course it doesn't have to be something like this. I also have this single battery supply from Practical Patch, handmade here in Scotland. It's really cool for if I'm just doing some recording and only want to use my tuner. I just plug this into my tuner and it powers it without having to have a battery in the tuner and having big power supplies or anything set up beside my recording setup. Just that and we're good to go. So the battery supplies are really cool and definitely something worth checking out. There is also this belief with some guitar players that some of your fuzz pedals, wahs and overdrive pedals will sound different on a battery to how they sound on a big multi-supply. And this also applies to whether you're using an alkaline or a carbon battery. So this could actually be a really cool way of figuring out if you like your fuzz pedals on a battery supply or on a multi-supply. So one last thing to consider before we build this board is volume and wah pedals. Now you'll see that I'm not putting a volume or a wah pedal on this board, and there's 2 main reasons for that. One is they don't take up a lot of power, so you could just run them on a battery, so there's no need in having that on the big multi-supply. Of course your volume pedal is passive as well, so that doesn't need power at all. The other thing is the angle these would be at. Now if you use a flat pedal board, that's totally fine, but if you use an angled board like the one we're using today, it takes the pedal from being flat at the right angle for rocking it back and forward with your foot and puts it at a funny angle, and it makes it harder to control with your foot. So sometimes it's good just to have this separate and just have it on the floor beside your setup. And one final thing before we build this board, you'll see that I'm using the power supply. In fact, I'm going to be using this one, the Cioks DC7, because as I said, I love this thing. And I'll be using it mounted on top of the pedal board. Now of course, an angled board like what I'm using today, you could mount it underneath and you even get this special grip thing for the Cioks to make that even easier. Even though this is an angled pedal board, I thought we'll mount it on the top so you can see how it works, whether it be a flat board or an angled board that you're using yourself. So now that it's all been built, let's have a look at the final result. As you can probably see on the board, I've not cable tied any of the power cables or the longer patch cables in place. This is just because this board is a temporary board for some recording that's very quickly going to be getting chopped and changed for other pedals, and ultimately going to end up being taken apart to put on the bigger board that I usually use. You'll probably have noticed as well that although the pedals are velcroed in place, they're still not too difficult to take off the board. This is for the same reasons, much sturdier types of velcro than what I've been using here, and really the only reason I'm using this is so that it's simple to take apart and rebuild. When I do settle on the final version of this pedal board, I'll definitely be using much sturdier tape, something along the lines of the pedal board tape that Daniel from the Gig Rig uses. That stuff is incredibly strong, and ultimately you would use that stuff on a board that is going to be getting gigged or taken into the studio a lot, and it's not going to be getting changed a whole bunch. But for what I'm doing today, normal velcro is just fine. It allows me to change things easily without too much hassle. So just to explain how the board is set up, like I said before, it goes into the tuner first, hence why I've got that jack free for just plugging a guitar cable straight into the side there. Then it runs into the Gojira Sub-Dark Fuzz and into the overdrive pedal after that, acting as a buffer. Then it comes down here into the Carl Martin Optical envelope filter, into the June 60 chorus from TC Electronic, then into the Ernie Ball ambient delay, and from the Ernie Ball ambient delay it runs into my Eden WTDI preamp. You can see there's also the tap tempo switch sitting at the bottom for the delay pedal, and that's something to bear in mind if you're going to use a tap tempo switch. It's key that the tap tempo switch is in a place where it's easy to get to. You don't want to accidentally be stepping on other pedals when you're trying to tap in the tempo, particularly if this is a pedal board you're using on stage. You don't want to be having anything in your way that could potentially make it hard to play. You'll also have noticed that against my earlier advice on the wah pedal and volume pedal locations, the Ernie Ball delay is on the pedal board. But really that's just due to the fact that this pedal needs to be pedal board mounted. I need to have that in amongst all the other effects so that it's easier to control. But I still personally think for wah pedals or for volume pedals that are going at the front or at the end of your signal chain, probably better to not have them on the board, particularly if you're going to be using an angled board like we've got here today. But I think it's about time that I stop talking and I'll let you hear how this pedal setup sounds. So I'll just play some stuff using this pedal board as the outro to this video so you can see how it all sounds. So until next time, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please hit like and subscribe down below. And please let me know in the comments what you think of this pedal board and what you're using on your pedal boards. I'd love to hear what you're all using. So thanks again for watching, really appreciate that. And until next time, keep working on those bass faces. Bye.